another CE News podcast. We have with us Tony, who is from Jamaica, but has been living in Poland for more than a decade. Welcome.
Thank you.
Today the topic will be somewhat more distant. You have naturally been living in Poland for a long time, but you also mentioned earlier that at some point you had been thinking about moving to Japan, and that in university you focused quite a lot on studying the conflicts and various problems in the East Asian sphere of the world, maybe more specifically in the South China Sea. What do you think? How are things developing over there in recent years? Is there a risk of conflict? Naturally, last few years have been quite difficult for the world. We've had the war in Ukraine, right now in the Gaza Strip. Do you think that there could be some problems with Taiwan and other countries around the South China Sea in the future?
Yeah, China views this region, especially the South China Sea, as their backyard. So I would say they won't tolerate any infringements. If they feel threatened, then it is possible that we might see some sort of conflict there, especially when it comes to Taiwan. If they see maybe stronger push for independence, or maybe more international influence from the outside onto the island, then I'm sure that they wouldn't hesitate.
And here in Central Eastern Europe, we're naturally very focused on Russia and Ukraine. But there are all those who say that since America has been involved in our region, then if there is a future conflict in East Asia, then technically these countries, Poland, Romania, the Baltic states, they will have to somehow try to repay the debt and maybe send some form of naval aid or any other type of, or just even joining in on sanctions. Do you think that there is a likelihood that this part of the world could be drawn into a conflict that erupts halfway across the world?
I would hope not, but in today's world, everything is interconnected. We have countries forming alliances and pressuring other members of those alliances to adhere to sanctions on another country. So it is possible. But I'm sure it's something that no one wants to see in terms of sanctions against China. I think this wouldn't be good for anyone, and the Americans themselves are very hesitant to do this, and I would say the Europeans even more so.
Yeah, there was this push for decoupling at one point. Donald Trump was naturally putting a lot of trade restrictions in. Joe Biden lifted some of them, but many of them actually remained. And to be frank, a lot of those policies were actually introduced during Obama. So this seems to have been a trend that has been going on now for a good 15 or 20 years or so. But so far, we're quite lucky with no kinetic warfare, at least in the region. But as we mentioned, you did study the South China Sea in particular. What do you think would be the flashpoints over there if there would be some form of conflict in the future?
Yes, number one would be Taiwan. Of course, there are also the Senkaku Islands, as the Japanese call them. There's the Spratly Islands, which are also
the Philippines have their interest in.
Yes. So yeah, these places, there are potential oil reserves there. It's also fisheries that are coming to question, the trade routes. So potentially these are all flashpoints that.
These trade routes are also very interesting because there is this debate on whether the U.S. will tolerate the rise of China. There is the so-called Thucydides trap, in which it goes back to the Peloponnesian War, when Athens and Sparta were competing for primacy. And it's basically this theory that when there is a existing power, a dominating regional or world power, and all of a sudden it sees that a competitor is growing, and the trend is that it could be overtaken, then that dominating power launches the war earlier to make sure that the war happens when they still have the advantage and not later. there are these theories that in the case of the US and China, that naturally the US would not want to get involved in a trade war, but the US still have a stronger navy, and China is very dependent on natural resources coming in from the outside, especially oil and other types of energy from the Middle East. You have the Malacca Strait on the way, which is very easy to block. And in general, you have this chain of islands from Japan through Taiwan, the Philippines, Indonesia, where technically the Americans, they could put their navy quite far out and then block off and start a maritime blockade of China. Is this something that you think that the Chinese are worried about in that part of the world?
Yeah, it's a long way for the American Navy to come, right, to China, and to be able to manage their let's say attack from there. I guess this is of course something that China has been working towards. They have been building up their military, their navy capabilities, naval capabilities. Some of it is of course very hush hush, a lot of covert activities. But I would say it's something that, yes, they are prepared for the scenario, for the Americans setting up bases, because they still control a few islands there in the region. But it's really far, right, for the Americans to be able to maintain soldiers and ships there over a long period of time. China is a huge country. They are connected with the European continent. So yeah, they have a large.
Yeah, the distances are definitely a problem here. And it's also very interesting to see what the Chinese have been doing when it comes to building these artificial islands. Usually there's a small little reef that was already there, but the Chinese have been putting in a lot of effort on building these landing strips and other assets. Do you think that China has ambitions in the region for the coming years? And there's naturally this talk about China being the next world power. Do you think that this is something realistic, that they could overtake the US in the future?
Yes, I believe so. As we see today, most of the America is in debt. Most of the debt is owned by China. China is growing technologically. Has a large population. Their influence around the world is also growing with initiatives like the Belt and Road. They're everywhere. They're building major infrastructure.
You can
projects.
see it in Africa.
Yeah, across Africa, huge. In Jamaica, a lot of the highways, let's say, also built by the Chinese. And yeah, so there is this their influence is growing.
There are also those that point to the form of government, that the Chinese dictatorship, which it has to be called for what it is, that it gives them more stability, and also the Chinese culture has it is not looking at 4-year electoral cycles. The Chinese in general are famous for having this long view on history. There is that joke, I don't remember exactly which Chinese diplomat it was who said it, but he was asked about his opinions on the French Revolution, and he said it's too early to tell. And if we contrast that with America, it seems especially that in the last 15 years or so, you have this political gridlock where the two parties are competing to such a degree that actually there is not a lot of work being done because they can't reach a consensus. Is this something that is also taken into account in the debate about this primacy over the world, or at least that part of the world?
Yeah, when it comes to getting things done, I guess in the form of government that's in China, they're able to get these roadblocks out of the way quicker, right? So there isn't input from different parties that can stall development, right? If they decide on something, they have the full backing of everyone involved to carry out the project, right? And in America, there's a lot of red tape, just a lot of, let's say, official red tape, and then of course there's the politics comes into play, where every 4 years there might be a change of government, change of policies, things that started or stopped, because the new president came into the office.
Yeah, we saw this definitely during COVID, some of those draconian measures, even though we had many of them in the West as well, but in China they did seem to take it much further. Also, what is very interesting is this surveillance society that is being built up in China, artificial intelligence and cameras on every corner of the street. It seems to be something that they are putting a lot of effort in, and it will be interesting to see where it carries on into the future. China is definitely a part of the world that we will have to keep a close eye on, and I think there will be reasons to return to this topic in the future. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.